A Biden-Trump face-off looking ever more likely. This as former President Trump securing his second consecutive win in the GOP primary. Data showing most conservative voters voted for Trump, while Nikki Haley got support from the undeclared. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
The New Hampshire GOP primary on Tuesday set a new record for voter turnout. More than 300,000 voters cast their vote, and they were closely divided between registered Republicans and undeclared voters. But a more moderate voter base here did not stop Trump from securing a double-digit victory against Nikki Haley.
And so that means this is effectively a general election testing ground. And if he wins by a reasonable margin, that predicts a landslide in November.
According to data by the Associated Press, Trump won about 7 in 10 voters who identified as conservatives and those who were registered Republicans. Nikki Haley, meanwhile, performed better among undeclared voters who are not affiliated with any political party. And just about half of those who voted for her say they are conservatives.
This race is far from over.
Haley's already campaigning in South Carolina on Wednesday, as Trump is set to hit the campaign trail again this Saturday in Nevada. Meanwhile, President Biden on Wednesday touting a long-awaited endorsement from the United Auto Workers.
Look, I kept my commitment to be the most pro-union president ever. I'm proud you have my back.
And now the chances for a Biden-Trump rematch are ever higher. President Biden saying after Trump's win in New Hampshire that it's clear that Trump will become the GOP nominee. He adds that personal freedoms and democracy are at stake in November. Reporting in Concord, New Hampshire, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Meanwhile, a CNN exit poll shows young Republicans made up Trump's strongest age group in Tuesday's primary. 60% of voters aged 18 to 29 voted for Trump, a sign that the former president is expanding his voter base in areas where he previously lacked. So what are lawmakers saying about the results from New Hampshire? NTD was at the Capitol earlier to find out.
Reactions to the New Hampshire primary poured in from Congress Wednesday. Here's some advice from Senator John Cornyn.
If the president would pick Tim Scott as vice president, I think that would be really a good ticket. After a primary, there needs to be a broader appeal than just to primary voters. You can't win with just your own base.
Nikki Haley's performance in New Hampshire was better than expected. Trump led her by just over 10 points, but she's facing another hurdle in her home state, South Carolina. Several top GOP officials there have already begun to rally behind her rival. That includes Senator Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham. Graham today gave his take on Haley's criticism of Trump.
For all practical purposes, the primary is over. She's done better than anybody in the history of South Carolina. She has a lot to be proud of. But her assessment last night of President Trump, I don't think will be widely shared in South Carolina.
In the face of a divided GOP, Senator Josh Hawley called on his own party to unite behind Trump.
Voters can make up their mind. They've clearly made up their minds. So I think now it's time for Republicans to unite. Our opponent here is Joe Biden. Let's unite and beat him.
When asked whether Haley should stay in the race, Senator John Fetterman said this year's election has long been between two candidates.
It's been about Biden and Trump, and it always has been. And I'm not sure why they're part of that conversation.
After Trump won the Iowa caucus, he has secured nearly 30 new endorsements from members of Congress, governors, and local officials. Sam Wang, NTD News.
While most lawmakers say it's going to be a rematch between former President Trump and President Biden, Nikki Haley is staying in the race as of now. In New Hampshire gave Biden the victory by write-in, even though he and the Democratic Party discounted the voters in New Hampshire. Here to analyze the New Hampshire primary and the race ahead is Dan Schneider, Vice President of MRC Free Speech America. Dan Schneider, thank you so much for joining.
Steve, it's good to be with you.
Good to have you, Dan. So Trump beat Nikki Haley decisively last night, 11 percentage points, taking in more than 56% of the vote in New Hampshire, the GOP primary there. Was this enough to solidify Trump's nomination to be the GOP candidate?
Look, I think the only thing that's going to prevent Trump from not being the nominee is some undemocratic occurrence happening. This whole primary season has been about other priorities by these other candidates. And I think that the New Hampshire results clearly show that is still true. Nikki Haley has other interests and other reasons why she's still in this race, but it was a huge victory for Donald Trump last night.
What do you think is continuing to make her tick, and what is the likelihood we see her calling it quits in the coming days?
Well, she's not going to call it quits. I think people have to put themselves into her shoes. She has there's no downside for her staying in the race. It doesn't cost her anything. She has plenty of money. It doesn't cost her a political future. Why would she step out of this race when there's no downside? In fact, there's potential upside for her by staying in. So I think she's going to be in this race for a long time.
So looking at it through her lens, what is a potential path that she may be visualizing, as New Hampshire was decisive and by all accounts would have been her best shot?
Look, we can all imagine some things that would happen that would make it impossible for Donald Trump to accept the nomination. And if in the unlikely event that one of those things transpires, I think everybody understands that Ron DeSantis is kind of the heir apparent. Among all of the presidential candidates, he's the one most like Trump. So Nikki Haley, by staying in, can lock up some delegates. She can generate some more support and has a chance, a fighting chance of trying to win the nomination if Trump can't take it.
Dan, I want to get your thoughts on the DNC fiasco in New Hampshire. What is your post-mortem assessment of the Dem primary and the issue of disenfranchising New Hampshire voters?
Look, for the Democrats, it all comes down to intersectionality, DEI. And it was decided long ago by the Democrats that white men in particular, Christian white men, if you're talking about Iowa, don't count and should not count. So the DNC made it very clear that South Carolina, whose Democrats are largely African American, that'll be the first primary that really matters for their contest. So yeah, those folks in New Hampshire were basically told, we don't care about you. You're not of the right demographic group for us to care about. That is one of the big differences between the two parties. One party cares more about demographics, about what a person looks like, or what kind of jeans a person wears, and the other party cares more about the individual and individual rights and respecting each individual as a human being.
South Carolina, it's very interesting because, as you mentioned, it's basically a reward to South Carolina for what they did for Biden back in 2020 in the primary. South Carolina doesn't matter all too much in the general election. In fact, it doesn't really matter at all. It's going to, go red. New Hampshire does matter. So does this potentially come back to bite President Biden in a general election?
No, when you say South Carolina doesn't matter, that's what the math indicates, if you're doing electoral math. But that's not how the Democrat Party is considering it. They need to generate support among their hard left. And so sending a message throughout America to the swing states, Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, these swing states, their base needs to believe that intersectionality still matters, that's what the Democrat Party stands for first and foremost. So it's a message to liberals all over America that what the priorities are for the party.
Dan Schneider, really appreciate your perspective. Thank you so much. And a major shakeup in Arizona politics. The state's Republican Party chairman, Jeff DeWitt, has resigned. DeWitt announcing his resignation in a statement earlier today. This came after Arizona's U.S. Senate candidate Kari Lake called for him to resign. It all started with an audio recording the Daily Mail published on Tuesday. It appears to show DeWitt presenting Lake with an offer of money to leave politics. The conversation reportedly took place last March. In his statement, DeWitt says he initially decided to fight for his job, but he said Lake's team sent him an ultimatum earlier today. It asked DeWitt to, quote, resign today or face the release of a new, more damaging recording. The former chairman said he's unsure of the contents of that recording, but he resigned as Lake requested so that she would stop what he called her attacks. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.